Now, with the record-breaking drought in Europe and what it's revealing, water levels across much of the continent are at the lowest they've been in centuries, and historical artifacts once submerged are now being uncovered.
In the west of Spain, a reservoir is quietly vanishing. The drought has dragged the water back so far that a cracked, sun-baked lakebed now sits where boats once floated. And out in the middle of all the drying mud, something is rising into the daylight. At first, it looks like a random scatter of gray boulders, but the closer you get, the more wrong that feels. These stones are too evenly spaced, too deliberate. They form a ring, some of them taller than a person, set here on purpose by someone, and then swallowed so completely by the rising water that almost everyone alive forgot this place ever existed. The Spanish Stonehenge.
ABC News and our coverage of the climate crisis here and across Europe experiencing its worst drought in 500 years. And what's now been revealed in Spain.
The place is called the Dolmen of Guadalperal, though the people who live near it use a nickname that tells you exactly why the world suddenly cared. They call it the Spanish Stonehenge. It sits in Extremadura, in the dry western reaches of Spain, in the province of Cáceres, resting in the bed of the Valdecañas Reservoir along the basin of the Tagus River. And here is the strange thing about it. When the water is high, it is gone, completely submerged, invisible, a secret held underwater for so long that simply laying eyes on it counts as a rare event. But when the reservoir drops far enough, the whole structure climbs back into the light. And it is so much more than a heap of boulders. Picture roughly 140 to 150 granite stones, some of them standing more than 6 feet tall, set in an oval around a central chamber about 16 feet across, with a long entry corridor leading in. And the stones did not grow there. They were quarried and dragged to this exact spot from miles away, by people who had no wheels, no iron, and no machines of any kind. Think for a moment about the effort that takes, the planning, the sheer number of hands. Which is where it gets strange, because the closer you look at this monument, the less it behaves like something built by people we would casually call primitive. And the first clue is hiding inside a single number: its age. Older than pharaohs.
So it seems that Stonehenge is accurately built to highlight the longest and the shortest days of the year.
Here is the part that quietly rearranges your whole sense of history. The Dolmen of Guadalperal was raised somewhere between roughly 5,000 and 3,000 years before the Common Era, which makes it around 5,000 to 7,000 years old. Sit with that for a second. It is older than the Roman Empire by thousands of years. It is older than classical Greece. It predates the great stone-raising phase of England's own Stonehenge, and it is older than the pyramids of Egypt. When the first of these stones was being hauled upright, there were no pharaohs yet, no togas, no marble temples standing on hillsides. The people doing the lifting were prehistoric farmers and herders living on the Iberian Peninsula, working with nothing but stone, bone, and muscle. And somehow those people coordinated enough hands, over enough years, to build something that has now outlasted every empire that came after them. It survived thousands of years above ground. It survived decades underwater. But survival, it turns out, is not the same thing as safety. And that becomes very important later on. First, there is a question that has hung over this site for 100 years, and no one has ever fully answered it. Before we get to the part of this story that almost everyone online gets wrong, take a second to subscribe, so these drowned and forgotten places find the audience they deserve. Because the next question is the one that keeps researchers up at night. What it was for. So, what was this place actually for? Here is the uncomfortable truth. Nobody knows for certain, but researchers have narrowed it down to a handful of strong possibilities, and each one changes how you picture the people who built it. The first is that it was a tomb. Dolmens all across Europe were very often collective burial places, single-chambered stone rooms where a community laid its dead to rest together, and the layout here fits that pattern closely. The second possibility is that it was a sacred or ceremonial site, a temple, a gathering place people return to again and again for rituals that matter deeply to them. And the third is the one that really sets the mind racing. Some researchers believe it may have been built as a kind of solar temple, oriented to the sun, so that on certain days of the year, the light would reach right into the chamber. That idea is debated, not proven. But here is what gets me. After a full century of study, nobody can say for sure why these particular stones were placed here, in this exact ring, on this exact bend of the river. And the strangest part of all is that the answer was very nearly lost forever, because this monument hides a history that most people online get completely wrong. The Forgotten Dig. Here is what almost no one repeating this story online realizes. The monument was not newly discovered when the water dropped. It had already been found and excavated a full century ago. Picture a German archaeologist named Hugo Obermeier crouched in the dry dirt of this very site somewhere between 1925 and 1927, brushing soil away from objects that have not felt daylight in thousands of years. In his hands, and in the trenches opening up around him, lies the proof of a living world: flint knives, stone axes, broken pottery, a small copper tool, and just nearby, the foundations of houses, dark smears of ash and charcoal where fires once burned, and worn grinding stones once used to turn grain into flour. He even turns up a Roman coin, dropped here long after the stones were raised, a sign that this place sat dry and undisturbed for a very long stretch of time. Think about what that scene is actually telling you. This was never a lonely monument standing in an empty wilderness. People lived right beside it, around the time it was built. They cooked here, they slept here, they buried their dead here. And then, within living memory, every trace of it was deliberately drowned, swallowed by water. So, how does a monument older than the pyramids simply vanish? In the 1960s, Spain decided it needed water and electricity far more urgently than it needed an ancient ruin. Under the government of Francisco Franco, the country launched a wave of enormous engineering projects, and one of them was the Valdecañas Reservoir, created by damming this stretch of the Tagus Basin. When the dam was finished and the valley began to fill, the rising water did not pick and choose what it spared. Villages went under, other ancient sites went under, including the remains of an entire Roman town. And the dolmen of Guadalperol, a monument that had already stood through 5,000 years of human history, was swallowed whole. By 1963, it was gone beneath the surface. For the next 50 years, it existed only in old excavation notes, a few faded photographs, and the memories of families who were forced to move out when the water came for their homes. And it might have stayed down there forever, except the sky had other plans. The drought returns. Here is where the title of this story finally pays off. Because what no archaeologist could ever do, the weather did. As Spain was battered by a series of brutal droughts, first the severe dry spell in the summer of 2019, and then again in the scorching summer of 2022, the Valdecañas Reservoir dropped and dropped and dropped. In 2019, it fell so low that the entire monument stood fully exposed for the first time in roughly 50 years. People who had grown up hearing stories about the dolmen, who had only ever glimpsed a stone tip or two breaking the surface, could suddenly walk right out across the cracked lakebed and stand inside the complete structure on dry ground, where there had been nothing but deep water their whole lives. And the moment was dramatic enough to be seen from space. The Earth Observatory run by NASA documented it using imagery from the Landsat satellite program, publishing views that showed the shrunken reservoir and marked the exact spot where the ancient stones had clawed their way back into the air. A monument built before writing even existed, photographed from orbit the very moment a drought handed it back to the world. 3 years later, in 2022, with Spain facing one of its worst droughts in decades, the water pulled back once more, and again the Spanish Stonehenge rose up into the daylight. But this time, people looked closer at one of the stones and found something carved into it that no one could fully explain. The carved stone. On one of the upright stones near the entrance, a tall slab called a menhir, there are markings. On one face, the shape of a human figure, and on another, a long, winding, squiggly line that has divided experts for years. For a long time, the accepted reading was that the line represented a snake, a symbolic or protective image of the kind found at other ancient sites. But more recently, a very different idea has been put forward. Some have suggested the wavy line is not a creature at all, but a map, specifically a depiction of the nearby Tagus River, winding its way through the surrounding land. Now, here is where I have to be straight with you. This is a hypothesis, not settled fact, and serious people genuinely disagree about what the carving really shows. But if that reading turns out to be correct, the consequence is staggering. It would mean this is one of the oldest known maps in all of Europe, a prehistoric community carving their own river into stone thousands of years before anyone made a map as we would understand the word. And the cruelest twist of all is that this carving and everything around it is quietly disappearing a little more every single time it comes back. A race against time. Here is the part nobody really wants to say out loud. Every single time the monument resurfaces, it is being destroyed. The granite these stones are made from is porous, and the slow cycle of soaking underwater for years and then baking in the open sun and air is taking a visible toll. Up close you can see it. Stones are cracking along old seams, some are leaning at angles their builders never intended, and a few have already toppled over into the mud. The very engravings that might hold the secret of that carved line are slowly fading away. And every time the water drops, curious visitors arrive, often with no one supervising the site at all, adding human wear on top of the natural decay. So now there is a genuine and painful argument among the people trying to save it. Some, including local residents who have gathered thousands of signatures on a petition, want the stones physically lifted and moved to dry, safe ground where they can be preserved and seen all year round. Others warn that relocating a 5,000-year-old monument could shatter it beyond repair, and that it may be far safer left exactly where its builders chose to put it. Spanish authorities have formally recognized how important the site is and granted it protected cultural status. But the core dilemma still has no clean answer: save it by moving it or protect it by leaving it to the water. What remains? So strip away all the noise, and here is what the drought truly revealed. Not a lost city, not Atlantis, not aliens. Something far better, precisely because it is real. A genuine prehistoric monument raised more than 5,000 years ago by people whose names we will never know, that outlived the Roman Empire and classical Greece, vanished beneath a reservoir within living memory, and keeps clawing its way back to the surface every single time the water runs low. The real mystery was never why it emerged. Drought explains that part easily. The real mystery is what those stones were truly for, what that strange carved line was really meant to show, and whether, caught between the erosion and the endless rise and fall of the water, anyone in the future will get the chance to stand in front of it at all. So, subscribe so you are here when the next forgotten place resurfaces from the mud. And then, tell me in the comments, if the choice were yours, would you move the Spanish Stonehenge to dry land to save it forever? Or leave it exactly where its builders placed it 5,000 years ago and let the water keep its secret? And while you are down there, tell me which drowned or buried monument you want me to uncover next.